season 2, the space for global culture shapers. We wanted to do something different, something a little fun, and so we decided to tell my story. So for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to share a little bit about my journey. Initially, I was like, I don't know if I can speak for 30 minutes, but we'll see. Yeah, so let's start with I didn't know I could be in the entertainment industry. I think that back in the day, I was like, oh, I wanna change the world. That's like what I want to do, my goal in life. But to me, that meant being in the government, right? Being in entertainment, being in the government. And so I decided that I wanted to study something that could lead me towards that. However, when I was in high school, I remember that I was in 3 different high schools. I went to one high school called San Diego High School, but that high school was divided into like 4 different high schools. And so the first one was like a leadership one. But this one was when I had just moved to the United States for the second time. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I hate this. But I think that I hated it not because of school, not because of like I guess socially. It was very difficult. I came from a school that I really, really enjoyed in Tijuana. And then I moved into this school that the expectations from teachers were very low. And that sucked. And like, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be here. So I moved to a different school that was, expectations were much higher. And I didn't realize like what it was. The only difference between these schools was that this, like the first school, even though it was like under the same school, the first school had mostly Mexican American kids, and like sadly it was underfunded, even though it existed within the same space. So everyone would tell me like, Kiara, like all the teachers, you should move to I think it was called International Studies, the International Studies School. You should move there, you know, with like where the smart kids are, where all the white kids go to. And I did not realize how racist it was back in that time. Now looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so racist. But so I moved there, and I hated it even more. And I think it was because it was very, very difficult. Like expectations were very high, and I just could not socially coexist within this space. But the one thing that I did enjoy when I was there was that I was in this art class where I would like literally spend my recesses painting and doing like all these artsy things, and I was like, oh my gosh, I actually really love this, and I think I'm good. And so I like started like considering maybe studying art. And I remember that I told my mom, and my mom is a fashion designer, so I guess like her understanding of a creative career is a little bit different. But she did tell me, she was like, Kiara, I think you can study art any time in your life, and I think that for university maybe you should get like a degree that's like more like job oriented, and art you can learn anytime. And then when I went to my dad's family, because I mentioned my parents are divorced, and my dad's family being like his siblings and all this stuff, I remember that I told them that I wanted to study art, and they all laughed, and they were like, oh my god, ¿de qué vas a trabajar? ¿De qué? O sea, como, ¿cómo se dice? Una persona como que te vas a morir de hambre por querer estudiar una carrera en arte. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'm not studying art. But I moved then to my 3rd school in San Diego, because I told my mom, I was like, I do not like living in the United States. And she was like, best thing I can do for you is move closer to the border. So then I moved to my 3rd school, Southwest High School, and then I was there for my last 2 years. And my last year, my mom was with my little sister's dad at the time. He lost his job, and so like it was like a rush decision to like move back to Tijuana. And I was like, man, I cannot move to Tijuana. I'm like, we moved to the United States for me to go to college here. So then we moved there, but we decided that I would still go to high school in San Diego. So that last year was the toughest year in my life, because I don't know how familiar people listening to this are, but there's a large community of kids who like cross every day to go to school. And crossing every day to go to school can be very exhausting because it's unpredictable. Like the time to cross is very unpredictable. So during this time, I was waking up at 3 a.m. to go to school. Sometimes I would be late because the line was like so very long. But that year I was like in 4 AP classes, and it was like the year that really mattered for university, right? So I was like in AP classes. I was like president for like 3 different clubs at the school. And so I was like, if I can do this, I can do anything in life. Because I was doing very well in school, but I was sleeping like 3 or 4 hours every night. But that got me into UCLA. So I went to UCLA and I decided to double major in, well, actually at the time, I decided to study international development because I was like, government, that's what I want to do. And so I started studying international development, and I didn't know that I could do anything in the entertainment industry. And I think I've said this story like in one of the episodes, but I remember walking, like I think it was my sophomore year, seeing like my friend Alma Rosa, and we like just stopped and we were talking about what we did in the summer. She was like, oh, I just did an internship at Nickelodeon. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is so cool. Like obviously I was very happy for her, but I was like in the back of my mind, I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I was doing something like that, because that sounds very cool. But I didn't know how I could get into that space. And so whatever, that passed. I moved on with my life. And this is very funny. I was like, you know what? Like, I love my Chicano studies classes. But even through that time that I was at UCLA, my international development major wasn't secured. Like, I was pre-international development. So what did that mean? That meant that I could not be in that major. So I was like, oh man, this is tough. And then everyone in in my like class for that major were very smart people. And I'm not saying that I wasn't smart, but I was not performing at the levels that they were. So I was like, oh my gosh, I need to choose something. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to have Chicano studies as like that backup option. So that's why I started studying Chicano studies, which is funny because going back to like the high school question of what are you gonna do with your life if you study art? Well, I got that question too when I told people that I was studying Chicano studies. So, you know, it doesn't matter what you study, people are still gonna tell you that stuff. But going back, I applied to the international development major, and I was on the wait list. And so I was like, I remember this very tragic moment in my life where I was like, I went back to like my apartment and I was crying in the restaurant. I was like, God, like, why did you do this to me? And you know, I did it to myself because like, I guess I wasn't like studying very well, but I was very, very disappointed. But whatever. Point being, I did a couple of internships to be in the government, and then I thankfully was accepted into the international development major, and so I started double majoring. But at a point in my life, like during my 3rd year, I think I was like, you know what? I've only done things that are like leading me towards being in the government, but I don't know if I love this. Like, I don't know if this is like the thing because I've never tried anything else. So I applied to be at a club at UCLA, which was like the fashion club. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I would love to model. I would love to like be in that club. And then there's some clubs, I don't know if you all are familiar, but there's some clubs that you have to apply to be in like the club at school. And I think I've mentioned this in like previous episodes, but I got rejected. And I was like, what? Why did I get rejected from a club? That was very internally embarrassing. But you know what? It was what it was. And it led me to try to figure out something else. And so I applied. I figured out that there was a Latinx Theater and Film and Theater Association at UCLA. And I was like, okay, let's apply again, hoping that I don't get rejected from this one. And I didn't get rejected, thankfully. And so while I was there, I made a couple of friends, and then I befriended my friend Luis, who was like at the time such a great person that made me awake to a lot of things, including the fact you've heard this story in like a previous episode, but I'm gonna repeat it because this was like a life-changing moment in my life. I remember we were sitting and talking about indigenous communities. I can't remember exactly what was happening at the time, and I was telling my friend, I want to be the voice of indigenous women. Like, I want to be able to like talk everywhere and like try to like talk about their fight and be the voice for them. My friend was like, yeah, why do you want to be the voice for indigenous women? Like, you're white. And I was like, what? what? I did not know I was white at the time, and I was like a white Latina, right? And I was like, I'm not white. I got very defensive. And he was like, Kiara, you clearly are. And you shouldn't be wanting to be the voice of these people, because these people have voices and these people are talking about their issues. People are not paying attention, but like, it's not your, no es tu lugar to be talking for other people. Like, you should elevate and amplify what they're doing, but you're a white Latina. So it's kind of, it comes across weird. So then I was like, white? Like, I couldn't believe it. And the reason why I couldn't believe that I was white was because, like, I guess within the context of my family, I am the darkest skin, and, you know, maybe it's the sun, o sea, estoy bronceada or whatever, but, like, I was just, like, my dad is, like, super white. My sisters are super white. My mom is also very light skinned. So I was like, what? But I guess, like, then obviously, if all these people around me are white, then probably I am too. And I remember going to, like, the chat, like, with my friends from high school, and I was like, no, not from high school, from middle school in Tijuana. And I was like, amigas, ¿ustedes creen que soy blanca? Everyone replied immediately. Sí, ¿acaso pensabas que no? And I was like, what? Everybody around me thinks this? So then I was like, okay, I guess, like, my majority of votes, I am white. And so then I started, like, thinking a lot about my identity in that space, right? And I remember that in this club, we were going to do, like, plays. We were going to do, like, a showcase of different plays. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to write and direct one. So I wrote this play, and this play was about, I wanted to talk about whiteness, and I wanted to talk about white supremacy in the context of beauty, and how we think, like, how women specifically are affected by white supremacy and how we internalize this. And so the play was kind of like a sci-fi type of story of, like, this community where, like, every kid who is born is, like, immediately transformed into a blonde person with, like, lighter skin. And so then like, families perpetuated this in this world. And so one girl once, like, comes to realization by her context that she wants to be proud of being brown. And so that's what the play was about, right? And I remember that at the time, the whole chisme about this is for another episode, but I'm going to tell, like, the important part of this story was that there was a lot of, like the day of the play, it felt like there was a lot of sabotage towards my play. And at the end, I was pissed. Like, I don't think I've been that pissed in a very long time. This was 2019. And I remember that I was very mad that people who were supposed to, like, be part of the team and helping me, because we were all helping each other, like, just made a mess with my play. And so I remember that talking to this one girl, we were fighting, we were arguing, and she was like, it's because, Kiara, I don't know why you're telling my story. And I was very mad, but I was like, I'm telling your story? Like, you had access to my script 3 months ago. If you felt that way, you could have told me before instead of sabotaging the whole thing. And so, but then, I think, like, looking back, I understand where the comment came from. But then I say this story because I feel like these experiences, like, made me be more aware of, like, what my place in helping and, like, talking and bringing people into different spaces, like, meant. Even though obviously I'm still, like, Latina within the United States, like, I think that there may be, like, levels to access that people have, and I should be aware of that. And so whatever, that play happened, and I applied to an internship at this production company called Macro, where they do stories for and by people of color. And I think that I was like, oh my gosh, I remember when I applied, I did not even know what a production company was. But I was like, hey, like, during the interview, I was talking about my experience, and I literally, when I got accepted, I Googled and, like, I read on Wikipedia what a production company did, and I was like, oh, that's cool that I'm gonna be doing that. And so that was an unpaid internship, and what that means is that I had to pay to do the internship to get a college credit. And I say this because, like, we talk about access, right? And I remember that summer, I was the poorest I've ever been. And it was a struggle, you know, because I was, like, going, like, using the bus to go to this internship. I learned so much. I learned so much about television, about film, and how a production company would exist within this space. But I remember, this is like a random story from the time, but I remember I barely had any money. I was like eating eggs and tortillas, that's like a must, and like bringing an apple with almond butter for lunch. And yeah, almond butter, pretty expensive, but I was like, I'm going to use this money to like eat this because I enjoy it. But that was like basically what I was eating. And I remember I went to Trader Joe's and I passed, like, I wanted to like pay for my food, and the lady was like, oh, your card's not going through. And I was like, oh, I don't know why. And so I was like, okay, like I'm gonna come back. I'll go to Wells Fargo and like get some money out. And so I was like, oh my gosh, why isn't my card going through? And so I checked, and I remember that I had to pay like $32, and I had 25, and I was like, oh man, if I leave this time, I will never be able to come back to Trader Joe's. So I called my sister. My sister wasn't picking up, to try to ask her to like transfer money. And then I called my best friend, Jessica, and I was like, and she answered, she sent me the money. I went back and I bought the food, but it was very funny because later she told me like, Kiara, literally it was like a miracle that I picked up because my phone was in my room and I had it on silent, but just when you called, I had come in to pick up something and I saw that it was ringing. And I was like, well, thanks to you, I had dinner that night because I was struggling, but whatever. I did this in that internship. And then I think that I always, like, I guess at my job too, I always tell people internships are for you to connect and meet people and befriend people, you know, because I think that the entertainment industry as a whole is a people's industry. And so here I met a lot of assistants and I met executives. And one of the things that I like about myself that I think I do is that I talk to everyone exactly the same. Like, and I guess during this time, I didn't know how the entertainment could be like very hierarchical because I like had never been within this space. But so that allowed me to befriend a lot of people. And so through that internship, I got my second internship at a management company that managed people in digital media. And there I met, like, I was very friendly with the CEOs. It was a very small company, and that's where I met Carla Santiago. And we weren't super close back then. She was one of the co-founders of this internship, but remember her name because she's an important part of this story. But there, I learned about how there's like so much money and things behind social media and the value. But I also learned there that I didn't want to be a manager. So I was like, okay, done, cool experience, let's move on. And so then my third internship I did at this agency called CAA, which is like one of the biggest agencies in the entertainment industry, and I worked in international television. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is so cool. These people's jobs is to literally like kind of befriend people in different spaces and get other people's jobs. I thought it was fascinating because they represented a lot of like talent that I grew up watching the content that they made. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is very fun. It's also in Spanish. I love it. Whatever. The internship, this was during almost the pandemic. The internship was cut 1 week. So it's not that much time, but they were like, you know, something's coming. We don't know what it is. The internship's ending. And so I was like, okay, whatever. I left. And during that time, Carla called me and she was like, Kiara, I would love to talk with you because I'm planning to start like connecting executives to each other and I would love for you to help me. Do you want to meet tomorrow? And I was like, yeah, let's meet tomorrow. I had class, but all my classes had like moved to Zoom. So I was literally in the bus, like listening to my class. And this wasn't a thing back then. So I was like, very revolutionary of me. I was like in the bus at my Zoom class going to like Carla's office to meet. And she told me about her project. She was like, I'm a little bit tired of panels. I would love to start helping people connect directly so that we can make a change in this industry. And I was like, I love that. I don't know much about this, but I'll help you. And literally, this was one day before everything got shut down. I think it was like a Wednesday, Thursday that this all happened. And so that weekend, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go back home for like 2 weeks. I'm gonna take 2 weeks worth of clothes. And I went back to Tijuana. And so I went back to Tijuana and I started helping Carla make those connections with people. And that obviously helped me also because I was like, oh my gosh, like I now know who more people are in the industry. And so then moving forward, I did this summer series, and it was like an online thing with where this company was interviewing a lot of their talent, so directors, fashion designers, fashion models, actors, and I was like, I'm pretty sure that everyone who's reaching out to people here are reaching out to these people, to like the people that are being interviewed. I need to find out who's the person organizing this whole thing and talk to her. And so I did my research and I found the executive behind this on LinkedIn, and I reached out to her. I was like, hey, I love all that you're doing. Like, I love this summer series. I would love to connect with you. And she was like, yes, I'd love to meet with you. And so we like did a phone call, and we talked and whatever. And she was like, oh, what are you interested in? And I told her I'm interested in television and film because that's what I knew at the time. And so she was like, let me connect you with the person in HR at our studio. And so she connected me with this person. Mind you, it was still during my summer classes. My classes were going to end in September. And I think we spoke in August. And so I met with this guy. He was like asking me questions about my experience. And he asked me like, oh, so are you looking for a job? And I was like, no. Very weird enough decision to be talking to an HR executive and me saying that I don't want a job. So I was like, no, I just want to take my time, take a little bit of time before I like start getting a job. And so whatever. This conversation, he was like, oh, okay, so I guess we should connect when you are looking for a job. And I was like, okay, amazing, thank you. A very naive young Kiara. And so then that ended. September passed, I finished school, and literally like a week or two passed, and I was like, oh man, I need a job. Who did I think I was when I told this man that I wasn't looking for a job? And so I had never applied to like an official like full-time job because I had done internships and all these things, but I didn't know how to get a job. I felt very embarrassed, and I think this happens a lot when you just graduated, that you don't really know how to use your network, and you don't want to feel like you're bothering executives that you've met because it's like, oh, I don't really like know these people. So I was like, oh my gosh, what can I do? And I'm Christian, so I was like, you know what? I am going to pray, fast and pray to get an opportunity because I don't know any other way, like not even applying to jobs. I was like, I don't know any other way to get a job. And so I did that. I started fasting, and fasting, the way that I fasted was, it's kind of like, I guess like going vegan, because I was not eating like any animal products for like, I think for like 2 weeks. And I was like, God, I really need a job. I would really appreciate it if you open the doors and you know what to do. Like, I leave it all to you. And he acted. Because literally one day I wake up to an email from the studio that like this woman had connected me to, and they were like, hey, you have an interview for the BA department. And I was like, amazing, it worked. Thank you, God, for like doing the job application for me. And so then I did the interview, and I remember telling my bosses like, oh, I want to be the Mexican Oprah. And that was like my thing. Like, I don't really know exactly what that means, but I love interviewing people. I love talking with people and learning about their stories. So I was like, I want to be the Mexican Oprah. And it's funny because I told my mom that I said this, and my mom was like, Kiara, like, I think you should think that you're going to be the first Kiara. And I was like, beautiful. So yeah, and I also think that like Oprah now, a little bit a thing of the past. I don't say that anymore because of some problematic things with Hawaii that have happened. But yeah, so then I got that job, and when I started that job, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to also be doing creative things. And so then that's when I started like interviewing people for videos. Some of y'all may remember Quick Talks with Kiara. And that happened because I was like, oh my gosh, how can I start doing interviews? I love watching like people interview artists and that stuff. And so I looked on LinkedIn. I don't know who I researched for, but I found this girl named Reina Figueroa, who became my North Star in the beginning, and I reached out to her because she used to do interviews for different companies, and it was interesting because she was younger than me. She was still in college, but I reached out to her and I asked her for help to start this. but she was studying communications. And I think that's something that also I felt very like behind on this, was that I didn't study anything in terms of media. I studied international development and Chicano studies, which honestly I love what I studied, but it's nothing within the media space. So I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so behind. Like, I'm never gonna do this. So I asked her for help, and she was like, Kiara, you can join. Like, she gave me like advice, and then she was like, I'm actually gonna do an interview next week. If you want, you can join it. You know, camera off and like be muted, but just to let you see what my interaction is with the artist. And I was like, what a beautiful woman. Her platform, Latino Wave, was what she started, and what actually gave me also some of my first opportunities in interviewing some artists for her. But she was like, you should interview the artist that I just interviewed. And so I interviewed him. He was in Costa Rica. I interviewed him over video, and that's what prompted me to start reaching out to my friends here in LA who were and are doing amazing stuff. And so I was doing like my job, my 8-hour job, and then also these interviews. And so through these interviews, I started like getting more practice and getting more comfortable. And fast forward to last year, actually end of 2022, I was like, oh my gosh, like, oh, I forgot an important part of this. I created this group with Kiara Santiago, Coffee Exchange, and then I was also connecting all of my friends, because I've made a lot of friends in internships and different networking events that I've done in the entertainment industry. So I was like, you know what? I need you all to meet each other, because if executives are starting to meet, like BIPOC executives are starting to meet to create impact, it's going to be very impactful in the long run if all of my friends know each other and start helping each other get opportunities. Very successful. A lot of my friends have gotten jobs through that, so I'm very proud. But point of this is that I always love connecting my friends to each other, and I started thinking, what is it that makes me know who to connect with who? And so I was like, you know what, is that I have very clear definitions of what they're doing. So if my friend is a writer, I'm like, oh my gosh, and I meet a manager, they should meet because they're looking for each other, you know? Or like, if my friend is in X, I know specifically what they want to do. And so I was like, you know what? I need to start telling people that I'm a host. And I need to validate that experience too. And so I was like, this year, 2023, I'm going to start telling people that I'm a host, because I had that experience of like hosting my podcast. And so I just needed to believe it, right? And so then, literally, I think it was January or February of 2023, the first time that I said that with in like an entertainment event, I like told this one girl like, oh, like what do you do? And then she asked me, and I was like, oh, I am a host. And I was like, oh, this feels so weird to say, but I need to believe it. And she was like, oh my gosh, I have a friend who like does interviews, like red carpet interviews. He has this platform, Entertainment Affair. You should reach out to him. And I was like, oh, thank you, I will. And so I reached out to him. And I remember that at the time he said, oh, you know what, like I just broke my leg. You know, reach out to me later. And I was like, oh my gosh, this person does not want to talk to me. So I was like, okay, whatever. I moved on from that. But then Raul did want to talk to me. And he was like, Kiara, Kiara, like, are you comfortable doing in-person interviews? And I had never done an in-person interview. But I was like, yes, I'm super comfortable with that. He was like, because I have an interview to do for the movie Creed. Do you want to do it? And I was like, yes, I do want to do it. And so I got that opportunity. And so through that, I went, and I was very nervous. But you should always say yes if you feel like prepared to. And even if you don't feel prepared, sometimes you have to like take this step and then see how things work so that you can keep moving forward with your career, right? And so through that, I got the Never Have I Ever opportunity as well. And then my friends started knowing that I was doing press jackets. This is what these are called. And so then I also was like, you know what, like I need to start meeting more people too. My goal last year was also to start producing the podcast in person. And Carla and I did an event where we met the incredible Stilo. And we met, and Carla told me, he's interested in doing podcasts. Yeah, you should talk about your podcast. And so I was like, okay. So then we talked about the podcast, and then simultaneously during this time, Erin worked with me. And so I remember that I still did the podcast like online, and I needed help editing. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I hate editing. And Erin, like, I don't know, like, could you help me? And no, actually Erin told me I could help you. And I was like, really? And so I was like, I'm willing to pay. And she was like, no, like, I'll edit it, and if you like it, like, let's see if we can still work together. And so then that's how these conversations started to start building the podcast. And it was conversations throughout month, like where were we going to film it, like who we were going to interview, what the podcast was. And so then thankfully on November, everything came together. And 11/11, I do think 11 is my number, but also I'm like, what does that mean? I don't know. But 11/11, November 11th, we had our very first interview last year. And it was such a beautiful moment. But then it's like, where do we want to take the podcast now? What is it that we want to do? And we really want this podcast to be not only an inspiration for you guys, but also for this to exist real life. Like, that's why we're doing like our community events where we celebrate the launches, for the people to be able to enjoy and be part of La Artisteada, every once in a while, to like meet other creatives, and start building this network for creatives in the entertainment industry. But also, if you're not in the entertainment industry, it's okay. We need each other for like multiple reasons. And so this is what La Artisteada is about. And we say that it's a space for global culture shapers, because we are shaping culture. We've had all the incredible guests for this season have shaped culture within their spaces and have worked with more incredible people, but they are making a change, and we're all making an impact. So this is what this is about. We would greatly appreciate you sharing your favorite episode with 2, 3, 5 friends, so that everyone can keep getting inspired, and we can keep helping each other and growing with each other. Oops. That didn't sound weird. But yeah, thank you so much for being part of this incredible season. I don't know if I missed anything. No. Okay. Yay! So I hope that if you missed an episode or two, you go back and listen to them, so that you can continue to get inspired by everything that we did. And I said I didn't know if I could fill in 30 minutes, but I think I ran out of time. Yeah, but thank you so much for being here. And yeah, have a great life. Yay.
Thank you for listening to another episode of La Artisteada. Make sure to subscribe and connect with us on Instagram and TikTok. It is very important for us to create spaces where people feel inspired through art, and this would not be possible without our incredible team, Erin Jimenez, Stylolive, and yours truly, Kiara.